a minute. Who's gonna fly the buzzard? We don't know anything about flying.
Neither did the Wright brothers, but they flew. Anything the Wright brothers can do, the Wrong brothers can do. Right?
Right, wrong.
The Three Stooges made us laugh for decades, but behind the scenes, it was no comedy. A mysterious nightclub murder, secret drug problems, and stars getting paid pennies while studios made millions. They even filmed scenes with dead actors, using tricks so wild, audiences never noticed. These are the shocking secrets Hollywood kept buried for 80 years. Number 14. Ted Healy Death Mystery. Let's start with Ted Healy, the man who brought the Three Stooges together. In December 1937, just days after his first child was born, Ted was beaten to death outside a nightclub. He was only 41 years old. On the night of December 19th, he was celebrating at the Trocadero nightclub in Hollywood. But what started as a happy night quickly turned into tragedy. Ted got into a fight with 3 men at the bar. Albert Cubby Broccoli, who later became famous for producing James Bond films. Broccoli's cousin, Pat DiCicco, who was connected to the mob. And Wallace Beery, a big movie star who had won an Academy Award. No one knows exactly what happened that night. Some say Ted, who drank heavily, started the fight. Others think he was attacked on purpose. What we do know is that Ted ended up badly hurt. Later that night, he stumbled out of a taxi at the Plaza Hotel, bleeding and confused. A doctor treated him, but Ted refused to go to the hospital. The next morning, things got worse. He started having seizures and died later that day. The official story was that Ted died from health problems caused by drinking too much, but a lot of people believe this was a cover-up. Rumors started flying, especially when MGM studio boss Louis B. Mayer sent Wallace Beery on a vacation to Europe right after Ted's death. It looked like Mayer was trying to protect him. Pat DiCicco's involvement made things even stranger. He had a violent past and mob ties, and his ex-wife, actress Thelma Todd, had died under mysterious circumstances just 2 years earlier. But the truth may never come out. What's clear is that Ted Healy's life ended in a way that was far more tragic than the laughter he brought to millions as the creator of the Three Stooges. Number 13. The Stooges' Exploitation. Moving on, the Stooges themselves had their own struggles. Even though they were incredibly popular, Columbia Pictures treated them unfairly for over 20 years. From 1934 to 1957, Moe, Larry, Curly, and later Shemp made 190 short films that audiences loved. But the studio's boss, Harry Cohn, paid them far less than they deserved. He kept them on one-year contracts, so they were always worried about losing their jobs. The Stooges, who had struggled with money before working at Columbia, were too afraid to demand more. Cohn lied to them every year, claiming that comedy shorts were losing money. This excuse allowed him to avoid giving them raises. In reality, the Stooges were a gold mine for Columbia. Their films were so popular that theater owners would only agree to show other Columbia movies if they got the Stooges shorts too. This trick, called block booking, made the studio even more money. Yet the Stooges were paid shockingly little. For their first film, Woman Haters in 1934, they earned just $1,000 to split 3 ways. Later, they got $7,500 per film, which was still divided among them. Their pay barely changed, even as their popularity grew. The Stooges worked hard, often filming back-to-back shorts with no breaks. They even did their own stunts, which led to injuries. Curly Howard, in particular, suffered several strokes, partly because of how physically demanding the work was. They didn't know how much money their films were making for Columbia because Cohn kept them in the dark. After they left the studio in 1957, Moe finally learned the truth about how badly they had been exploited. Number 12. Curly Howard's struggles. Curly struggled with deep insecurity and sadness. One big reason for Curly's insecurity was his bald head. When he was 12, he accidentally shot himself in the ankle while cleaning a rifle. While he was healing, his mom shaved his head, thinking it would help his hair grow back thicker. But his hair never grew back the same, and Curly became convinced women found him unattractive because of it. This thought never left him and shaped how he saw himself. To deal with his feelings, Curly turned to bad habits. He drank too much, ate too much, and had a lot of relationships with women. But none of these things made him happy. When he was performing with the Three Stooges, he wouldn't drink before or during shows. But as soon as the shows ended, he would drink heavily, often going out to clubs and bars. He also ate to comfort himself, which made him gain a lot of weight over the years. By 1944, his weight became a serious health problem, making his heart and blood pressure worse. Curly had a lot of attention from women, but he believed they didn't really like him because of his baldness. Ironically, many women were drawn to his charm and fun personality. But his relationships were often quick and messy. He married multiple times, usually to women he barely knew. One example was in 1945 when he married Marion Buxbaum after only 2 weeks. The marriage was a disaster and lasted just 3 months, ending in a very public divorce. It hurt his reputation and made him feel even worse about himself. In 1946, during the filming of Half-Wit's Holiday, Curly had a severe stroke on set. It was clear he couldn't keep performing. His brother Shemp, who had been with the act before, stepped in to take his place. After that, Curly's health went downhill fast. He had more strokes and ended up in a wheelchair by 1950. He spent his last years in and out of hospitals, unable to perform and struggling emotionally. On January 18, 1952, Curly passed away at just 48 years old. Number 11. Stand Against Hitler and the Nazis. In the 1940s, when many in Hollywood were afraid to criticize Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, the Stooges used their comedy to fight back. In 1940, they released You Nasty Spy, where Moe played a silly version of Hitler named Moe Hailstone. It was one of the first Hollywood movies to mock Hitler, even coming out before Charlie Chaplin's famous The Great Dictator. At the time, this was risky because the U.S. hadn't joined World War II yet, and some people in America still supported Nazi Germany. But the Stooges didn't care. They wanted to show the world how dangerous Hitler was. Their boldness continued with I'll Never Heil Again in 1941, a sequel to You Nasty Spy. By then, public opinion in America had shifted, and more people saw the Nazis as a threat. These films didn't just make people laugh, they also showed the dangers of totalitarianism in a way that was easy to understand. The Stooges even referenced concentration camps and censorship in their jokes, long before most Americans knew much about these horrors. Their courage didn't come without risk. There were rumors that the Nazis had put their names on a death list alongside Charlie Chaplin's, though this was never confirmed. Despite the risks, the Stooges felt it was their duty to speak out, especially since Moe and Curly were Jewish and knew the terrible reality of Nazi persecution. During World War II, the Stooges kept supporting the war effort. They made films where they outsmarted Nazi spies and entertained troops with USO tours, performing up to 7 shows a day. Even though it was physically exhausting, especially for Curly, they believed in helping boost morale during tough times. Number 10. Moe Howard's Humiliation. The Three Stooges had made 190 short films for Columbia. Their slapstick comedy had helped the studio stay strong through tough times like the Great Depression and World War II. But by the late 1950s, things were changing. Television was taking over, and Columbia decided to shut down its short film department. On December 20th, 1957, the Stooges were told their contract wouldn't be renewed. There were no goodbyes, no thank yous, nothing. Moe, always proud of his loyalty and work, was heartbroken. Still, Moe wanted to leave on a positive note. On that February day, he dressed in his best suit, carrying a small box of his belongings. He walked up to the Columbia studio gate, hoping to see some old friends. But when he got there, a young security guard stopped him. The guard asked for a studio pass. Moe explained who he was and why he was there. He even pointed to a poster on the wall featuring the Three Stooges. But the guard didn't care. Moe didn't have a 1958 pass, so the guard refused to let him in. Moe, the man who had entertained millions and helped make Columbia rich, was left standing outside, feeling humiliated and forgotten. This moment hit Moe hard. He had spent decades at Columbia, building friendships with actors, crew, and even the tough studio boss, Harry Cohn. Cohn had once given Moe a special key to the studio to thank him for the Stooges' contributions. But now, none of that mattered. Moe later wrote in his autobiography that this day felt like his entire career had been erased. It was a painful reminder of how fast Hollywood could turn its back on its stars. Number 9. Real injuries behind the slapstick. The Stooges' comedy might have looked silly and fun, but behind the scenes, it was dangerous. Their routines, like eye pokes, slaps, and head bonks, often led to real injuries. One of the worst examples happened during the filming of Three Little Pigskins in 1934. In the movie, the Stooges are mistaken for football players and forced to play in a real game. For the big scene, they were supposed to be tackled by actual players from Loyola University. The Stooges were terrified. They weren't stuntmen, and they knew how risky it was. Larry Fine even told the director, Raymond McCary, that they couldn't do it. Earlier in the shoot, Larry had already lost a tooth from an accidental punch, and Curly had broken his leg in another scene. Moe, always protective, backed Larry up, saying, "We're not doing it." Eventually, the director gave in and found stunt doubles. But when the scene was filmed, things went horribly wrong. The football players tackled the stunt doubles with full force. Two of the doubles and two other actors broke their limbs. Only the double for Curly avoided injury because of extra padding. Moe later said the director was so shocked by the chaos that he just sat with his head in his hands. This wasn't the only time the Stooges got hurt. Moe broke his nose during a scene, and real eye pokes sometimes caused temporary vision problems. Directors like Jules White often pushed the limits, using real tools like mallets and saws to make the stunts look more dangerous. The Stooges rarely complained, though. They believed it was part of the job. Years later, the truth about these injuries came out, and people began to see the Stooges in a new light. Their willingness to risk their safety for laughs earned them respect as true pioneers of comedy. Number 8. Mose tried to quit after Curly's stroke. In 1946, during the filming of Half-Wit's Holiday, Curly Howard had a terrible stroke. It happened suddenly. He was sitting in the director's chair, waiting for the final scene, when he stopped responding. Moe Howard, his brother, found him with a twisted face, unable to speak. This was a heartbreaking moment for Moe, and it marked the end of Curly's time with the Three Stooges. Moe was devastated. The Stooges weren't just an act for him, it was family. Curly was his younger brother, and seeing him like that broke Moe's heart. He started to think about ending the group completely. He wasn't sure they could keep going without Curly's amazing energy and humor. The idea of performing without him felt wrong. But the studio, Columbia Pictures, didn't want to lose the Stooges. They were too popular and made too much money. Harry Cohn, the head of the studio, told Moe they needed to keep going. They pressured him to find someone else to replace Curly. This put Moe in a terrible position. He wanted to take care of Curly, but he also had to think about Larry Fine, the other Stooge, and all the people who worked behind the scenes. Their jobs depended on the Stooges continuing. After a lot of thinking, Moe made a hard choice. He asked his older brother Shemp to join the act again. Shemp had been with the group in the early days, but had left to work on his own. At first, Shemp didn't want to come back. He had his own career and didn't like the idea of replacing Curly. But Moe convinced him. He told Shemp it was only temporary, just until Curly got better. Number 7. Controversial World War II propaganda films. During World War II, the Three Stooges used their comedy to support the war effort, but some of their wartime films are now viewed as problematic. Between 1940 and 1945, the Stooges made shorts that included stereotypes reflecting the prejudices of the time. These films are rarely shown today because of their controversial content. One example is The Yoke's on Me, 1944, where the Stooges encounter Japanese-American characters portrayed with offensive stereotypes. The plot involved mistaking these characters, depicted as escapees from internment camps, for Japanese soldiers. This reflected the widespread prejudice that led to the unjust incarceration of over 110,000 Japanese Americans during the war. Another example is No Doughboys, 1944, where the Stooges, dressed as Japanese soldiers for a photo shoot, are mistaken for enemy combatants. They exaggerated accents and behavior, relying on caricatures that modern audiences find offensive. In Booby Dupes, 1945, the Stooges are mistaken for Japanese saboteurs, leading to slapstick scenes that trivialize the realities of war. These shorts were part of a broader trend in Hollywood, where propaganda films often relied on racial stereotypes to demonize the enemy. Today, these wartime shorts are rarely aired. They are typically excluded from television broadcasts and DVD collections, only appearing in academic discussions with disclaimers. While these films are a difficult part of the Stooges' history, they also provide insight into the cultural attitudes of 1940s America and the role entertainment played in shaping them. Number 6. Fake Shemps. When Shemp Howard died suddenly on November 22, 1955, the Three Stooges were in big trouble. Shemp had joined the group in 1946 after his brother Curly's health declined. Now, with Shemp gone from a heart attack, Moe Howard and Larry Fine were devastated. But there was another problem. The Stooges were still under contract to make 4 more comedy shorts for Columbia Pictures. The studio wasn't going to let them off the hook. Columbia came up with a strange and bold plan. They decided to finish the films using old footage of Shemp and a stand-in actor. Joe Palma, a lesser-known actor, was chosen to fill in as the fake Shemp. Palma had to copy Shemp's movements and comedy style, but the trick was to keep his face hidden. In every scene, they made sure Palma's face was turned away or covered by props. The first of these films, Rumpus in the Harem, came out in June 1956. It mixed new scenes with old clips from a 1949 Stooges short called Malice in the Palace. Most viewers didn't notice anything odd, but Palma's role was carefully hidden in plain sight. This fake Shemp trick worked so well that the studio repeated it for 3 more shorts. They kept recycling old footage and filming new scenes where Palma's face was never shown. In Hot Stuff, Scheming Schemers, and Commotion on the Ocean, the same thing happened. They even used clever props like beards or life preservers to hide Palma's identity. The studio quietly passed these films off as normal Stooges comedies, and fans didn't realize what was going on. It wasn't until years later that the truth came out. People were shocked to learn about the fake Shemp era, and it became a famous Hollywood story. Number 5. Blacklist for violence. In the late 1930s, the Stooges ran into trouble because their comedy was considered too violent. Groups like the National Legion of Decency called their humor dangerous for kids. On July 15, 1937, the Legion claimed that the Stooges' slapstick, eye pokes, face slaps, and head bonks could harm children's minds. Parents started to worry, and some theater owners took action. By August 1937, theaters in 14 states had banned Stooges films. This hit the trio hard. Their income dropped, and Columbia Pictures lost 32% of bookings for their shorts. Moe Howard even had to mortgage his house, and Larry Fine sold a prized violin to stay afloat. Things got so bad, they had to cancel a big tour, losing a lot of money they desperately needed. To fight back, the studio hired a child psychologist. Her research proved that kids knew the comedy wasn't real and didn't try to copy it. Armed with this study, Columbia convinced some theaters to lift their bans. The Stooges also toned down their humor, adding more jokes and less violence. Slowly, the bans ended, and their reputation improved. By 1939, the Stooges were back on track, but the financial damage had already been done. They worked hard to recover and eventually became one of the most loved comedy teams in history. Number 4. Moe Howard's secret writing hobby. Everyone knows Moe for his slapstick humor and silly comedy, but not many people know he had a secret love for writing. Moe spent a lot of his life creating stories and even wrote novels and short stories, though they were never published. Writing was something he loved, and it gave him peace when life got hard. As a child in Brooklyn, New York, Moe grew up in a working-class family. He loved watching vaudeville shows and silent movies, which made him dream of performing and creating. But it wasn't until much later that he started writing seriously. In his autobiography, I Stooge to Conquer, Moe talked about how he would sit at his typewriter during tough times and write to feel better. Even though Moe wrote a lot, none of his books or stories were published while he was alive. His stories were often about friendships, loyalty, and everyday struggles, things that also showed up in the comedy of the Three Stooges. One of his novels was inspired by his close bond with his brothers, Curly and Shemp, and how they worked together through thick and thin. After Moe passed away on May 4, 1975, his writing was mostly forgotten. But in recent years, fans and researchers have started to rediscover his stories. In 2013, his autobiography was re-released with extra commentary from his family, revealing more about Moe's hidden talent. Number 3. Larry Fine's gambling troubles. Larry Fine, one of Moe's partners in the Three Stooges, had his own struggles. Larry loved gambling. At first, it was just a fun hobby, playing cards and betting on horses. But over time, it became a problem. He started losing more money than he could afford, and gambling began to take over his life. Things got worse in 1957 when Columbia Pictures stopped making the Three Stooges films. Without steady work, Larry's gambling habits put him in serious trouble. He was always generous with money, often lending it to friends without asking for it back. But now, with no big income, his debts piled up. By the late 1950s, Larry owed thousands of dollars to bookies and casinos, a fortune back then. Even with all this going on, Larry stayed cheerful and kept performing with Moe when he could. But his health began to fail. In January 1970, Larry had a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. This meant He could no longer do the physical comedy that made the Three Stooges famous. After his stroke, Larry moved into a retirement home for actors. Even though he couldn't perform anymore, he stayed social and kept his positive attitude. He spent his final years there, surrounded by people who understood the ups and downs of show business. Larry passed away on January 24, 1975. Despite his struggles with gambling and health, Larry's kind heart and sense of humor left a lasting impression on everyone who knew him. Number 2. Joe Besser's no-hit contract. Joe Besser joined the Three Stooges in 1956, but he came with a big rule. He didn't want to get hit or deal with too much rough comedy. This was shocking because slapstick, slapping, pie-throwing, and poking was what made the Stooges famous. Fans loved that crazy humor, so Besser's demand felt like a big change. Besser had his reasons. He was born on August 12, 1907, in St. Louis, Missouri. Before joining the Stooges, he was already a successful comedian. He was on radio shows like The Abbott and Costello Show, where he played a bratty character named Stinky. He used his words and funny faces, not physical jokes. When Shemp Howard died in 1955, the Stooges needed a new member. Columbia Pictures, their studio, picked Besser because he was already under contract. Besser didn't want to join at first. He had seen how hard the physical comedy was on the others. Curly Howard had a stroke in 1946, partly from the stress of performing. Shemp also had health problems. During contract talks, Besser insisted on a no-abuse clause. He didn't want pies in his face or big hits to the head. Fans quickly noticed this change. Instead of getting smacked, Besser would yell, "Not so hard!" Some liked his funny words and fresh style. Others felt it wasn't the same Stooges anymore. Besser only stayed with the Stooges for 2 years, from 1956 to 1958. They made 16 shorts, but these are often seen as the end of the Stooges' golden era. Comedy was changing, and slapstick wasn't as popular anymore. Even though his time was short, Besser's rule showed how comedy and performer safety were evolving. Number 1. Moe Howard's iconic bowl cut. Moe Howard's famous bowl haircut started by accident. Moe was born Moses Harry Horwitz on June 19, 1897, in Brooklyn, New York. His mother, Jenny, wanted a daughter but had only boys. So she let Moe's hair grow long and styled it in curls. By the time Moe was 11, his curls were shoulder length. Kids teased him constantly. He was bullied on his way to school, at school, and on the way back. One day, Moe couldn't take it anymore. After school, he went to a friend's house, grabbed scissors, and started cutting his hair. He didn't look in a mirror. He just cut in a circle around his head. When he saw what he had done, he was horrified. It looked like someone had put a bowl on his head and cut around it. Terrified of his mom, he stayed out late that night. When he got home, his parents were so relieved he was safe that they didn't even punish him. The next day, his mom tried to fix it, but the bowl shape stayed. This haircut became Moe's look for life. It made him stand out when he started performing in vaudeville in the 1920s. It was perfect for comedy. The haircut made his angry expressions funnier and added to the slapstick. Even as he got older, Moe kept the look, adjusting it as his hairline receded. Fans loved it. His bowl cut became one of the most famous hairstyles in comedy. What started as a mistake became Moe's signature. It was a reminder that sometimes, even embarrassing moments can lead to something great. Moe turned it into part of his comedy legacy, and it helped make the Stooges unforgettable.